Welcome to Crossroads, a show that gives you insights beyond the headlines. And if you want to support our reporting, please hit the like button. It actually helps get the show out to more people. Now look, New York City, we could soon have government-run grocery stores. Another grand experiment here that could spread across the country. And look, at least that's an issue on the ballot right now with the upcoming mayoral elections. Zoran Mandami, the Democratic mayoral candidate, he stated that if he is elected, he plans to create a network of city-owned grocery stores that aims to fix affordability and access issues. This is his on the campaign. Watch this.
Grocery prices are out of control. The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some stores are even using dynamic pricing, jacking up the cost over the course of a day depending on what they can get away with. It doesn't need to be this way. I'm Zoran Mamdani, and as mayor, I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce. We will redirect city funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, whose mission is lower prices, not price gouging. These stores will operate without a profit motive or having to pay property taxes or rent, and will pass on those savings to you. They'll partner with small businesses and nearby farms and sell at wholesale prices. The job of city government isn't to tinker around the edges while 1 in 4 children across our city go hungry.
Now look, it sounds like a good idea on paper, and it is an issue that New York City's been trying to solve for a long time. You do have some neighborhoods where they don't have grocery stores. People can't even really buy like fresh produce or anything like that, and it is a big problem here. Now, part of that's just because of crime. Grocery stores have trouble staying open in those neighborhoods. They've been trying to fix it. But is a state-run grocery store, is that the solution? Something owned and run by the government? Well, we can look to history and basic economics to understand where this will probably lead. Now, look, personally, I think this will be a lesson in the economic outcomes of state interventionism, that grand old phrase we often talk about. I do not think this is going to be wide enough to cause like major issues. It might, but because again, it's just New York City, right? But let's just imagine how this is going to work, right? Let's imagine everything works out. I know there's a lot of red tape right now. Let's say they get all of that solved. They build them. We have government-run grocery stores all across New York City. It functions. People pay less money for food, which is the whole purpose of this, right? The stores have enough of it to go around and things are great, right? People just, don't just rob them and make it not profitable, especially because of these stories coming along in the, light on crime policies, because the mayor, the mayoral candidate, in addition to wanting state-run grocery stores, also wants less incarceration. And you know what? If people are hungry, they might just steal food. But let's imagine none of that happens, right? Maybe it'll work. But imagine it turns out to be an economic miracle, right? Success for New York City. What happens then? Let's go into the grand trail of classical economics. Well, here's what happens, right? They build them, they function. Private companies will then have to compete with the government entities, meaning all those private grocery stores, the bodegas and everybody else, they'll need to compete at a loss because you're competing with something that's state subsidized. Right? What does that mean? Well, naturally, they will not be able to compete. Right? They have to pay taxes and they have overhead costs and issues like that. It's the nature of state subsidized markets. People will typically go where the prices are lowest. And if one store doesn't have the overhead costs of another because they're government run, well, they don't need to make as much money. Not only that, but government entities don't even need to make a profit to work, meaning they can operate in the red, which they often do, by the way. Look at the Postal Service, but they've been struggling for a while now. They can operate in the red. They can operate at a loss, whereas any other business would just go out of business, right? The store with the lower prices will then have to, they'll dominate the market, meaning the government-run entities will then essentially have a monopoly. The others will then have to either cut their overheads, maybe even trade at a loss in order to artificially subsidize the industry, or they'll go out of business. The best you could expect is some of the big grocers in New York City. Maybe they want to keep a footprint in the city even if they're not making money on it. Maybe they'll just close up shop. This will then put more pressure on the government entities, right? Because they'll have to fill the gap. They'll need to expand their operations. You can't just have, you can't just have grocery stores going out of business and the government-run entities are the ones now filling that role, right? They'll have to open more stores because they'll need to fill public demand. And especially because it's a state-run initiative and they'd be pressured to make up for the losses, right? The real question is, will they have the capacity to do that? Could the city actually fill that need? How many could they actually build? Could they replace every single grocer in New York City at least? And how would they operate these? Well, then there's another big problem because look, people take advantage. The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And one cause of that is that, well, they just don't count on people breaking the rules sometimes. You can have a perfect plan, boom, everything in place, and it works fine until someone breaks the rules. And then the whole plan goes out the window. And for these state-run grocery stores, look, that'll probably be theft. People will probably steal stuff from them. Especially if the other aligning policies is just less consequences for theft, right? Arresting a man for stealing a loaf of bread, are you? Well, maybe they were just hungry, right? They're just hungry. They're stealing because they're hungry. And it's going to be hard for a government entity to criminally charge people for that because at the very least, it'll look bad. It'll be bad optics, right? Become victims of their own narratives. Yeah, they're prosecuting people for stealing a loaf of bread. Jean Valjean, how could you, right? But even aside from theft, if the prices are low enough, they could also deal with scalpers. What does that mean? People going into these stores, buying the products at low costs, and then selling them somewhere else. Maybe in the next state over, or on the internet, or maybe on your street corner because there's a limit on goods sometimes. They can undercut the markets, in other words. People buy where the prices are low and they sell where the prices are high. And if your whole promise is low prices, you're going to be the target, right? This is already a very big problem, by the way, in New York City with the cigarette industry because they have state cigarette taxes. People try to get around the taxes by smuggling cigarettes. One example of that. Imagine that exact same problem, but on every other product on store shelves. Now, that issue will also cause a spillover effect, right? External markets will have to adjust their prices to compete with the state-subsidized ones, the surrounding states, right? The aggrieved parties, they could sue, they could lobby to have something done to stop this, but even outside of that, the issue of resellers will cause the problems for these state-subsidized markets yet again, because again, supply and demand. They'll have to keep supplies to compensate for businesses they put out of business and to compensate for people buying up key goods that they think they can resell. What does that result in? They're not going to have that issue with everything. But you have to imagine a store, they have to stock multiple goods. Some of those goods will be more in demand than others. And those more in demand goods will be the ones that people want to buy at a low cost and resell. Think of the toilet paper crisis of the early COVID lockdowns. Remember when people were buying up all the toilet paper and you had people even buying up everything and then building like warehouses and they wanted to resell toilet paper and you had to go down the street and try to buy a roll of toilet paper from like a scalper. That's what'll happen. That will lead to shortages. Shortages lead to demand. Demand leads to scalpers doing it even more. And then you have the age-old lesson that, well, you'd think we should have learned already by watching this tried by the Soviets and many other communist regimes before, right? What then happens? Well, to prevent the problem, these stores will have to limit the amount they sell. Only one per customer, only two per customer. They have to put a cap on it, in other words. And then people will want to get the demanded items before they sell out. And so they'll have to wait in line and hope they get there early enough to get what they need. And then it happens. Then it comes true yet again. The age-old bread lines make their return. Now, of course, look, the other possibility is that they don't put people out of business or don't reduce prices enough to incentivize resellers. And maybe they do prosecute theft. If you steal a loaf of bread, you're going to jail. I don't think they'll do it, but we'll see. Well, look, if that happens, it means the prices in the entire initiative, the prices aren't that much lower, right? Which is the entire point. That would only happen if they just kind of don't do anything. And so the whole effort really wouldn't do much to begin with. That is the only way this would not cause this ripple effect of problems. But I would say that, given that low prices are the goal, this is why they want to do it. It's the narrative driving the initiative. Well, then the scenario that I just laid out will be the very likely outcome. And the socialist world has repeated that exact same scenario many, many times before. Just another lesson, right, on why communism does not work. Now, folks, on another topic, I mentioned yesterday the investigations into the Autopen are moving forward. And, well, the big discovery that just came out was that during the Biden administration, some of the staff apparently made changes to documents after Biden signed off on them, meaning they did some things without the authorization of the president. And that's raising some concerns because if they were adding things in that the president did not approve of, well, that's like someone subverting the government, basically. And that's problematic also when you consider they had a device that effectively gave them the authority of the President of the United States, the mandate of heaven, right? And the Autopen machine, of course, that could write his signature, signing documents, letting people off on criminal charges, right? Those kinds of things. And now look, the investigations into this whole big scandal, they're turning their sights to over 1 million documents that were signed with the Autopen. They're now looking into all of them. Daily Wire said this. They said the White House is conducting a review of potentially more than 1 million documents approved through the Autopen process under former President Joe Biden. It's a lot of documents signed with that pen. It says the White House counsel's office is leading an investigation into the former president and his staff's use of the Autopen. The White House has already assembled tens of thousands of documents from Biden's term turned over by the National Archives for review, according to Fox News. Now, that's a lot of documents. This could, in some ways, almost decertify most of what was done under the last 4 years. It's not clear yet how they plan to prove which documents were authorized by President Biden and which ones were not. How do you even handle that, right? It was signed by an Autopen. All these signatures are the same. The only way you could prove that one was not signed with authorization is if Biden says, I did not authorize that one. And so I don't know how they would prove that otherwise unless somebody admits to it or something else. We will have to see. That may be happening to an extent already because there are people saying that they made changes, quote unquote, to things after Biden signed off on it, meaning there are already some people admitting to it. So we'll see what happens with that. I don't think there's really a precedent on how they could possibly handle this. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before. So we'll have to wait and see how they decide to handle all of this. Now, meanwhile, English, the language we all thought was a language of the United States, turns out it was not, but it is now. English is now the official language of the United States of America. Yes, that's right. This is the language of the land. But what does it actually mean in practice? I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just a pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, And they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. English is now the official language of the United States. It's been done now. And that also means that government agencies will no longer need to provide translation services or other language services or anything else. Not even, you see English and Spanish a lot. It's a long list of languages. Even in New York, it's like 170 languages they have to deal with. Donald Trump signed an executive order on this back in March, which stated that, quote, to promote unity, cultivate a shared American culture for all citizens, ensure consistency in government operations, and create a pathway to civic engagement. It is in America's best interest for the federal government to designate one and only one official language. Establishing English as the official language will not only streamline communication, but also reinforce shared national values and create a more cohesive and efficient society. Imagine that, a country where we can actually understand each other and everybody speaks the same language, maybe, and people can communicate. Well, we're actually now seeing this order get implemented. We're now seeing this get put into action. We're seeing how it works. The Blaze said, now the Department of Justice is following through on making the order and making sweeping changes to the federal government and its services to make the aggravating experience of dealing with government agencies a whole lot simpler. No more press 1 for English. Right? It says the Justice Department is also looking to eliminate initiatives from a Clinton-era executive order which introduced limited English proficiency programs, which you've been paying a lot of money for, by the way. It notes, the Trump administration said that LEPS often prioritized, it's the name of the program, often prioritized multilingualism over English proficiency among new Americans and could impede assimilation and strain resources. Of course, everybody's probably experienced, but if you want to get a job with the government, it really helps to speak multiple languages. Multilingual individuals, you have a much higher chance of getting a good job. Maybe that'll change now. Maybe that's no longer a criteria because people will just be expected to speak English. Now, we'll have to wait and see what this looks like in terms of how government agencies implement it. It should be clear, this does not necessarily forbid agencies from using other languages. It's not going to be like you have your language Nazi and they're saying, did I hear something other than English spoken in the office today? It's not like that. But at the federal level, if there's no budget for it, if there's no money for it, they're not going to create a service for it. And so this will actually save a lot of money. At the local level, though, states, even cities and areas, so on, it could be different because this doesn't necessarily regulate them. And I would imagine some states will follow the federal government on this. You will probably see, honestly, more of the Republican states follow this same program. But other states will probably keep services in multiple languages, although it's going to be on them to provide the budgets for it. For public schools especially, this is going to be big. I would actually say public schools will probably be impacted the most through this. We'll see how this works with government funding because remember, a lot of the money comes from the federal government for public schools. And if they make it so that money cannot be used for ESL or English as a second language, the schools, I don't know, the city is going to have to cover it or the district's going to have to cover it. They'll have to cover it themselves. And that's a big deal too because a lot of the budgets have to be used for various programs to accommodate people. In many parts of the U.S., especially with mass migration and mass illegal immigration, I do know a lot of schools have struggled with their budgets to accommodate them because they have to provide language programs for every language coming in. There was reports coming out in New York City, for example. They had to provide services for 170 different languages. And what does that mean? In California, a lot of schools have had to cut after school programs. They get rid of sports programs. They get rid of security because they can't afford it, and they have to put all the money into ESL, English as a second language. So you could actually say a lot of kids are losing a lot of opportunities because the schools just don't have enough money to fund it all. We'll see how they handle that again, because you're also going to have the problem that some kids are just not going to know what's going on because they don't speak the language, right? This will probably cause a lot of controversy. You are going to have issues of kids who don't speak English struggling to get by, at least until they pick up the language. Kids do tend to pick up languages pretty quick, not all of them. But I'd say especially this is going to run into, I think the biggest problem this is going to face is issues of emergency broadcast systems, right? For example, if people get told to evacuate, flash flood warning, get out of there quickly, and it's only in English and people don't understand the alert and risk their lives. It could also be a problem with police. Maybe someone needs to call in an emergency, 911. Where's 2 for another language? And there's no support for it. What do, right? Now on the other side though, there's also all kinds of apps that people use these days to automatically translate into different languages. You can speak into it, point it, and it says what you want to say. Like, I've used those apps when I've traveled abroad. They're very commonly used these days. I think we could expect to see those get used a lot more. The issue is they're going to have limited use, and we'll see. You could also say, though, it will incentivize people to try to learn English. It'll incentivize people to try to, again, become part of the country more and adapt to the culture here, and maybe try to understand us a little better. It seems that in addition to helping cut costs also, this new declaration that English is the official language of the United States, it's meant to encourage people to assimilate. And it's not even just the US talking about this, Europe's talking about it, Germany is trying to get people to assimilate to their culture if they migrate there. They don't want people coming in from all these different countries and changing the country. Rather than changing the country, we want them to become Americans, right? That's kind of the idea. Now, speaking of education, though, the Department of Education, at least as we know it, could soon cease to exist. They're not going to get rid of it entirely, but they're getting rid of a lot of it. Town Hall said this: the United States Supreme Court will allow President Donald Trump to dismantle the Department of Education, the ED. And this includes laying off 1,400 employees at the agency. It says further, and according to multiple reports on Monday, the High Court paused an order from U.S. District Judge Myung Joan in Boston. It says Joan previously issued a preliminary injunction reversing the layoffs and questioning Trump's agenda pertaining to the Education Department. Those good old nationwide injunctions, which technically should not be there anymore, but are still being used. It says on Truth Social, Trump wrote, and not be there anymore because the Supreme Court ruled against it, right? But on Truth Social, it says Trump wrote that the Supreme Court has handed a major victory to parents and students across the country, and that the decision gives power back to the states. One of the big narratives here. Hey, New York, do you. Texas, you do you also. You can have very different policies state by state, and that's kind of the idea, right? Now on X it says Education Secretary Linda McMahon said the court confirmed the obvious. The President of the United States, as head of the executive branch, has the ultimate authority to make decisions about staffing levels, administrative organization, and day-to-day operations of federal agencies. If Trump decides that he has a flashback to The Apprentice and just wants to fire everyone, he can fire them, is what they're saying. Now on this point also, the Trump administration, it doesn't look like it's going to completely get rid of the Department of Education. They're not talking about that. It's the way it's being framed, right? But it's not quite that, it's pretty far, but it's not quite that far. What they're talking about, they want to maintain some programs. They're going to keep the ED in place, and they're basically just going to work on things like grants or, student loans and those kinds of things. But the efforts do look like they're going to cut down to just bare bones services. A lot of jobs are going to go away. A lot of policies are going to go away. A lot of the, people would say, bureaucracy is going to disappear into the ether. And the point of all of this, as Trump was saying, is to give more authority back to the states on how they decide they want to run their public schools, which is closer to where it was when I was in school, by the way. Remember, the Department of Education is still pretty dang new. This is not a really old department. And even up until the Obama administration, where they made Common Core, states still had a lot of sovereignty. When they created a federal level mandated education program, which again was Common Core education, some people liked it, some people hated it. They changed math, as you might remember. And they also changed history, as you might remember. In fact, by using the 1619 project of New York Times falsified American history, where their own fact checkers noted it was falsified and they published it anyway, and then adopted it into state education across the entire United States, demonizing Americans and trying to make kids hate their culture. But again, that's all changing now. If states want to keep it, they can. If they don't want to keep it, there's other options. Now look, meanwhile, there are also more bombings in the Middle East. Shocker, right? But these ones are actually a bit different. These ones actually do seem to have brought an end to a conflict overnight. Incredible, actually. Not something you commonly see. Israel launched attacks on several key buildings in Syria, and this included the country's Ministry of Defense headquarters, 2 other targets that were close to the presidential palace. These are being framed as attacks on military targets, although you could say it's at the officer buildings. Official videos from the Israeli Defense Force, they show aerial shots of the bombings. Israel did announce this. They said, yeah, we did it. And they said the reason for it is they're defending the Druze religious group, which has been fighting with the Syrian government. Now, really interesting. Almost immediately after this, right after the bombings, they announced a ceasefire. Israel did manage to basically bring an end to the civil war. Just with a few targeted bombings. It does seem that at least for now, the war is over. I mean, we'll see if it lasts, right? Lasting peace is one thing, but as of now, it's over. So, interesting development. All right, everyone, that said, let's jump into some questions. Questions, comments, leave them in the chat. Anything you want to talk about. You know, we're pretty light discussions here, light as we can be. Quick announcement also. I'm not going to have a show on Monday next week. Unfortunately, it's a scheduling issue. I have to travel for an interview, and I couldn't. The individual I'm going to be interviewing, it's for a special feature I'm working on. Remember, Fridays I'm using my time now for special features. One of the interviews I'm trying to get has very limited schedule, and it's the only time that they had available. So I won't be back until next Tuesday. I really apologize for that. But that said, let's jump into some questions. Foggy01, you're saying, using government money with the EBT cards, all the government-run grocery stores, what could go wrong with that? Yeah. Well, we'll see. You know, remember too, all right, so that's a whole big issue too, right? That's a whole big issue too. Let me explain. So, they have SNAP benefits, right? EBT cards, food stamps, as we used to call them. Do they still call them food stamps? I don't even know. People getting food stamps. Okay, so you could expect some of these government stores to rely more heavily on that. They've opened the door for more places to use them now. You're going to be seeing a lot of those used. But the issue is, in addition to the idea, at least in New York, of creating government-run or city-run grocery stores, you also have the kind of coinciding issue. What did Trump just do? What did the big, beautiful bill just do? It created work requirements for food stamps. It's going to kick a lot of people off. Remember, there's the Medicaid investigations, there's the Obamacare side of it, and there's the food stamp side of it. So if people are under 65 years old, they don't have a kid under the age of 7, and they're able-bodied, they have to work a part-time job if they want to get those benefits. And there's also going to be processes to see Are you actually eligible for this? Do you actually need it? And so if you have people who just plain don't feel like working, bless their hearts. They have to get a job if they want to get free food and free everything else. Now, what will that likely cause? You could expect, the end of free handouts. You could expect some people to have kind of a rough time. Some people, they might struggle to find work. Some people, I'd say the majority probably will get jobs. And keep in mind too, and this is important context, a lot of people who get these programs already have at least part-time jobs. There's an 80-hour-a-month requirement now to get these benefits. Again, unless you're over 65 or you have a kid under 7 years old or you're disabled. Now, what will that also mean for these government-run stores? Well, I'd say you have the perfect storm of problems. The normal issue of government-run grocery stores that the Soviets demonstrated so well. You have that. Then you also have them saying they want to have light on crime policies, so they're probably not going to be prosecuting crimes as much as they have been, which, by the way, is why you don't have grocery stores in many of those neighborhoods in New York City as it is. People just rob them too much. And because of that, they're not profitable and people don't want to open them. That's why you don't have them in New York City and in some neighborhoods. You have those problems, and then in addition to it, you have people losing their food stamps. So what's going to happen? People who decide they don't want to work 80 hours a month, or they just don't feel like paying for stuff. They have the light on crime policies enabling them to rob the government entities, and they just might do it. And so it's going to create a lot of strain on the system. Again, it's like the perfect storm of socialist experiments, which the petri dish of New York City will show us the results of, right? Another question here, Martin McKenzie, you're saying seizing the means of production and offering something for nothing. Textbook communism. I have no confidence. Well, and the other side too is someone has to pay for it. Because look, you could easily say, well, look, the government pays for it. So what if people steal? So what if it can't make a profit? A lot of government businesses operate in the red, unless they have a monopoly, right? Unless they have a monopoly, they operate in the red. The normal problem you have with state-run entities is they don't have to care about service. They don't care if you have a good experience or not. They can treat you like garbage. They don't care. They're not going to lose their jobs over it. They don't, if you decide to go shop somewhere else, they couldn't care less. Okay, I know the DMV tends to be the example people use for this. I've met some very nice people at the DMV, but let's just throw them under the bus because it's an example. The DMV is an example of this, right? They have a monopoly. And in all honesty, the service has gotten a bit better, at least last time I went. But when you have a monopoly, you don't really have to care about people going somewhere else, right? You got no place else to go. I've heard a lot of, I'm not a veteran, but I've heard a lot of veterans talk about problems they have with the VA. I know the VA is trying their hardest too. But when you deal with government-run entities, they don't have to care as much about service, because again, in free market principles, what do you have to do? Well, quality, service, and price. Those are the three things you need to have covered if you want to succeed. You need to have the best quality product you have at the lowest price possible with the best service possible, and that will create a successful business. A subsidized industry. If you're subsidized, you don't need to make a profit. You don't need to have good quality, really. Right? And also, look at the old see-through Velveeta government cheese. How's that quality of cheese? I don't know. Spam is pretty good. I can tell you Hawaiians have a special place for Spam. But some other government food, not so much. And service, they don't have to care about. So the normal things that create a successful business in the free market, you don't have to have for state-subsidized industries, which is why you end up with a lot of the problems they often face, right? Kenneth Harris, you're saying, Kenneth Harris is saying the purpose of assimilation, the purpose is assimilation. You're talking about the English language requirements. Looks like the move to end balkanization of America via language. Yeah, that's true. Now, look, you can look at this in a few different ways. Okay, so America is a very, I don't mean to sound lame by saying this. America is a very large country, but it is. Technically, we're 50 different countries. What is a union of states? Every state is basically a country. Every state in the United States has its own government, has its own, the governor is basically the prime minister. You have state legislatures, which are like, the state Congress. You have state courts. You have a state military, which is the National Guard. In the United States, every state, if you were to compare it to another country on earth, it would basically be a country. What makes us different is that we have a federal government, which is a government on top of those governments that unites all the states under a common constitution and rule of the land, right? A country, the difference between a country and a tribe is you bring together groups that are different from each other. This is one of the big problems Europe has. Why has it been so hard for Europe to create a cohesive regional government, right? The European Union is trying to do for Europe, which is a whole bunch of countries, they're trying to do for Europe what the federal government does for the United States, create an overarching government that unites people under a common, rule of law and identity and so on. Why is that hard for Europe? Well, if you tell a German person that their culture is no different from France, or you tell someone from, UK pulled out of it. If you tell someone from Spain that their culture is no different from Greece, if you tell someone from Italy that they're no different from, Poland, they will get very mad at you. Not only that, but even within their countries, there are very different regional pockets. Like, I've been around Italy quite a bit. You go to northern Italy, you're going to have very different cuisine, very different culture from southern Italy. And if you tell a person from northern Italy they're just like someone from southern Italy or vice versa, they're going to get offended. Northern Italy is a lot more Germanic. Southern Italy is a lot more like Greek-like. They're a lot more kind of laid back. Whereas in the north, they're a lot more organized and, on time and things like that. And so my point with this is the difference between a nation and a tribe is you get them to unite under a common idea while maintaining somehow some of the unique identity of the tribe. When it comes to the United States, people say we're a melting pot, and I don't know about that fully, but we have ideas that form what we are as a nation. I'd say what forms the United States as a nation is our history, our constitution, the belief in freedom. And the belief in freedom needs to be primary if you want to become an American. That is what really just the fundamental essence of America is, the belief in the freedom of the individual. And if you want to have the government taking care of all your needs, please go somewhere where they already have that. I hear the beaches in North Korea are very nice. They're actually opening a resort there. Hey, be my guest. But if you want a king, don't come here, right? So, the challenge then when you have multiple cultures uniting under a common government is you're going to have different religions, you're going to have different cultural backgrounds, you're going to have different languages. And that is a reality. I have quite a few friends who are like Native American. I used to be a personal assistant to one of the Cherokee elders. My grandpa is very close to, he goes and stays in Indian country all the time with the Seminoles and stuff. And so I know I know they're sovereign nations, right? But you have some people part of those cultures who don't speak English. They speak the old languages. You also have the reality that the western U.S. states did used to be under Spain. No, not the current Mexico as we know it. They were under Spain, and of course rebelled against it. And you have, because of that, people who speak Spanish, right? That is the case also. And you have people coming in from all over the place speaking, with their languages. What is the process of assimilation then? I think and this is where I really support the idea of a common language. People should not feel like strangers in their own country. And I think a lot of people have started to experience that. I have. If I go back to where I came from in San Diego, it does not look like the same country I grew up in. I feel like a foreigner, right? Depending on where I'm at. And some countries are much more than that. France, if you go to France right now, my wife's, she's French. It doesn't feel like it did 20 years ago, right? A lot of countries are like that. They don't. There's not a sense of unity. There's not a sense of something that unites people on common ground. And if you want to have a country, rather than, as mentioned here, a balkanization, right, where they just split into they go back to tribalism. If you don't want to have a balkanization, you need to have common ideas, or at least a common language that unites people. So I understand that, and I personally like the idea. I'm a very stereotypical American, where I travel around the world and I speak to everybody in English. Because let's be honest, a lot of people speak English, and I just kind of expect everybody to speak English. So I'm a bad example. Don't be like me. But I like the idea of people coming here and speaking English so I can talk to them, right? Anyways, another question here. Number one, Tonya, you're saying government subsidized socialism never works and always turns into bad things. I agree. Because it's not sustainable. Yeah, okay, so there's another principle that I've been talking about for years. Okay, I know I'd say oftentimes I'd love to write a book about that. The challenge I always have with writing a book is when I sit down to write, I'd kind of rather write a special feature and do like a feature or like documentary than I would a book. Because the reality is people buy books and they don't read them, right? Whereas people will watch a documentary or special feature. On a more realistic note, I could probably take scripts I write and just publish them as books. But one thing I've been thinking about writing is something along the lines of why failure is necessary. Give me the freedom to fail. What communism is, it's a lot of things, but one of the things it does and it implements through state-subsidized institutions, right? It subsidizes failure. And by subsidizing failure, it prevents things that do not work from failing. So it doesn't work, right? Something should go out of business. I'm not going to name names, but think of several state-run entities that you think would go out of business if they had to compete with the free market. You tell me. Do they meet the requirements of quality, service, and price? I'm not going to name names, right? But that's what happens, right? Communist systems, they prop up things that don't work. And you can look even at failing lifestyles. If you want to sit around doing drugs all day and you plain old don't feel like working, you're living a failed life, right? And by that I mean your lifestyle would not be sustainable with outside intervention. If you were to not have people propping you up, you would starve to death. You depend on other people to keep your lifestyle going. whether that's through welfare or crime or the generosity of others, right? It is a failed lifestyle. You see the same thing in other regards, where state-run businesses in the Soviet Union, they were non-functional. In China right now, they even have what they call ghost factories, or they call them zombie factories. Zombie factories, they're dead. They don't work. They're non-functional, but they're propped up. You have that oftentimes where an industry would not be sustainable without state interventionism. And why is it not sustainable? It's because people don't want what they're selling, the quality is not good enough, the price is not good enough, and the service is not good enough. If they were not subsidized, they would go out of business. And so what communism does is all these things that would otherwise fail, they prop them up. But there's something that happens when you do that. By subsidizing failure, you also prevent success, right? And this is interesting because I've been thinking about this a lot. If you subsidize failure, you prevent success. You can even disincentivize it. I'll give you an example. I like to read posts and what people say about things, and there's some Reddit posts of teachers talking about what it's like in schools right now. And they're saying they have a problem, right? No child left behind, participation trophies, everybody's a winner, there are no losers in life. What happens? They have a big test or a final project, and you have one kid who stays up all night working on it, reads all the books, does the whole project, presents a big report, puts everything they have into it, and maybe gets an A or a B. And then you have another kid who does nothing, right? They run it through ChatGPT or they just slap something together. They spend 5 minutes on it, and they get the same grade as the kid who put in a lot of effort because again, it's subsidized failure. Nobody is allowed to fail. What that ends up doing is it disincentivizes the kid from trying, right? And so the kid has now been disenfranchised. He's like, well, why did I put in all this effort if the kid who put in no effort got a better grade than I did or was pushed to the front faster than I was? What happens is they stop trying and the whole system fails. The same thing happened with the Soviet factories, by the way. That was one of the ways that the Soviet economy collapsed, was people just stopped seeing a need to push themselves. There was nothing incentivizing it. There was no reason to push yourself or work hard because the end result was all the same. It was equity, equality of outcome. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter if you work 80 hours a week or no hours a week. You have the same exact results, so why bother trying? That leads to failed societies. But if you understand the way that free market principles work, in a free market, what happens? Benjamin Franklin, right? Thomas Edison. I'm thinking of electricity. When Thomas Edison was inventing the light bulb, and he was failing over and over and over and over again. And his friend asked him, Mr. Edison, why are you doing this? You've failed 70, 80 times. Thomas Edison answered, I didn't fail. I just found 70 or 80 things that don't work. Right? And I think this is a very uniquely American idea. This has been told to me by friends who've worked in other countries. CMAC, you might have seen, we have a show called California Insider. CMAC, he's the host of that. He's also in charge of our California office. Great guy. He and I talk quite a bit. CMAC was telling me because he's worked in Iran and he's worked in China and he's worked in he used to run businesses, right? He works for Epoch Times now. But he was saying a lot of countries have no tolerance for failure. If you fail, you're done. No tolerance, you're out. Get out of here. You're not forgiven. America has a lot of forgiveness for failure. If you fail, You're expected to learn from your mistake, get back up on your dang 2 feet, and do better again next time, right? You're expected to learn from your failure and improve from your failure. And so in the American idea, failure is necessary for improvement. You find out what does not work. You find out, okay, you know what? Drinking every night makes me unhappy. It leads to a failed lifestyle. I'm going to learn from my lesson and I'm going to stop doing it. Oh, I took a risk. I made a product. I failed. The public did not want it. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to find something else and make it better. You can read a lot of really good writings on this of American business philosophy. Dale Carnegie and even Donald Trump, right? Some people say that failure is the way, right? That there's a book, The Obstacle is the Way, things like that. Trump even has this whole theory of never giving up, right? Never, and I think he had a book on that. I think it was actually just called Never Give Up. And the theory is this: even if you fail, don't give up. If you do something that doesn't work, don't give up. Don't go throw yourself off a bridge. Get on your own 2 feet again. Learn from your mistake and do better next time. And that is the path to success. That is the principle of being able to create something new, of treading unknown territory and building something that works. And communism prevents that, you see? When you have state-subsidized failure, you prevent that process from happening, which is, again, really different ideas, right? I've been digging into this in my head quite a bit. I like to think about this kind of stuff. Anyways, another question here. Let's see. James Dyson is saying, Josh, do you think that other Middle East nations will coalesce and work together to quell the radical Islamist movement that is ongoing and never stops? Yes, to an extent. So some countries are actually very strict on this. You know, I know in the United States, when we think of that region, look, let's be honest with ourselves. We were all kind of like in war propaganda mode for the last, 25, 30 years, right? We've been in war propaganda mode because we've been going and fighting in that area. And we fail to realize sometimes that some of those countries are very different from each other. Not all of them have problems of terrorism. Why do some of them not have problems of it? It's because they're very strict on it. They severely punish terrorists. Saudi Arabia, great example of this. They don't tolerate terrorists. Qatar, a bit better on it. Some of those countries, they're really strict on it. And I think that's why Trump was also saying, remember when he was meeting with Prince bin Salman, right? When he was meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, it seemed like he was interested in having Saudi Arabia become kind of like the regional leader. He wanted to have them, kind of create some of the principles of the region. Iran has been very much on the other side of it, where they're framed as kind of the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. And so you have some governments that are very pro-terrorist, and you have some that are very anti-terrorist. And if you look at the quality of life between one and the other, it's night and day. The ones that are against terrorism, they live much better lives. And you do have some very stable, pretty good countries, and let's be honest, they live probably better than most of us do in terms of wealth. Very stable, very, very wealthy countries when they're able to, when they treat terrorism seriously and don't allow it to take root. And that is the issue. Hank Eli, can you discuss Chinagate? Man, you got to be more specific. There's so many right now. I believe what you're referring to would be the CCP's alleged attempts to rig the 2020, which one was it? The 2020 election, right? So FBI Director Kash Patel handed over to Chuck Grassley in the Senate documents from the FBI from a classified, source who claimed that the Chinese Communist Party was planning to rig the American election. And the method, from what we've been told publicly, and there have been testimonies, closed-door testimonies, what we were told now by the Senate, by Congress, in terms of what was actually in that report was this. The Chinese Communist Party was allegedly planning to ship large amounts of counterfeit driver's licenses to the United States, presumably to Chinese agents, and the plan was to have these individuals use those driver's licenses to get fraudulent mail-in ballots, because we had the perfect storm again. Universal mail-in ballots, ballot drop-off points, a lot of the laws cleared for ballot harvesting and everything else. The door was thrown wide open for manipulation, and the allegation was the CCP was planning to manipulate that open door. That report was suppressed, hidden deep within the vaults, and never saw the light of day until now. And we're getting more details on it. The allegation, from what we, at least based on what we're being told, including Kash Patel and then congressional Republicans, not so much the Democrats. What they're saying is this. They're saying that the reason that report was suppressed was because the claims contradicted public testimony of Christopher Wray, the then FBI director, saying that basically there were no problems with the election, there were no risks to it, they weren't aware of any threats, right? And that report would have contradicted that. Did that ever actually happen? Was the CCP's plot to rig the election put into effect? We don't know. But what we do know is there was corroborating evidence that this may have been the actual plan, because they did intercept a shipment of counterfeit driver's licenses coming to the United States from China. They did intercept something that should have corroborated the claims of the classified source. Now, did that result in them actually rigging the election? We do not know. They have not fully investigated yet. But Trump has been saying in his public statements that that is something the FBI and the Justice Department are working to investigate now. So we'll see. E. Frago, you're saying communism with American characteristics. Scary thought, right? This is something also that even communists don't understand about communism sometimes. When you have these college kids and you have you have some guy who survived a gulag, and the guy from the gulag is there, communism is terrible. They tortured me. It was horrible. They killed my family. And you have a college kid telling this communist survivor, well, that wasn't real communism. That wasn't real communism, guy who barely survived communism. That was Stalinism. That was Maoism. Things like that. Yeah, the college, the latte liberal, right? They call him. The college kid knows better than you, old man. Why is that? It's because communism is implemented differently based on the unique traits of each individual culture and country. This goes into the nature of dialectical materialism, what you would call the living soul of communism, which is an ideology of inversion. Communism often creates its movements by looking at what are the values of this culture, what is the nature of this culture, what is the religion of this culture, what are the social dynamics of this culture, and then what they do is this. They take the cultural foundations and they flip them upside down. They create social movements around the inversion, and then by splitting society into two extremes, they then cause conflict, right? Conflict leads forward. And so they drive the two forces into social struggle. They also look at the different divisions in society. Maybe you have two different cultures. Maybe you have multiple languages, as we were discussing. They'll look at those differences and they'll try to create conflict within. In place of unity, they'll try to create conflict. They try to drive wedges between people, and by doing so, they create class struggle or social struggle or things like that. Which is why in every communist country you have a different narrative. I mentioned in China it was the landlords, in Cambodia it was the wealthy, it was the intellectuals. In Russia, it was the wealthy peasants, right? In Nazi Germany, it was the Jews, right? They all chose a group to drive people in opposition against. The American communism, it's the billionaires, it's the wealthy elite, it's the toxic masculinity, right? It's those types, and so it's white people in general somehow. That is the narrative of social struggle here, and so the communists here try to amplify those narratives and then drive social struggle, so that people, as they struggle, what do? They demand representatives who will eliminate the abuse, the alleged abuse of the alleged dominating class. Those toxic masculine men, those toxic masculinity men. How many women out there miss masculine men, by the way? How many of you miss masculine men? Those toxic masculine men, they need to be shut down, throw them in jail. Toxic masculinity. Don't hire them, right? Push them out. They do that. So they want one group to go in and seize from those individuals whatever grants them power, to get rid of the institutionalized abuse of however they choose to frame it. And that's what they do, right? When I watch this stuff, to me it's no different from what you had in Nazi Germany and the way they drove the narratives there between classes. It's no different from what you have in China, where basically every 10 years the CCP just rolls out a new persecution. First it was, again, the landlords, then it was the rightists, then it was the teachers and the intellectuals and the people who believed in tradition and the people who believed in the four olds of old habits and old beliefs and old cultures and so on. Then, of course, it was the people who were counter-revolutionaries. If you just didn't believe in the revolution, you could be killed. Then, of course, 1999, then it was democracy activists, right? The Tiananmen Square massacre. And then after that, it was the persecution of Falun Gong or Falun Dafa, which targeted 100 million people. And so they always have these rolling campaigns where they try to drive the society against other people in order to say, you need the government to do it for you. And, and that's how they consolidate power, by the way, within those structures. Because in order to solve the problem of the evil white men, you need to have an overarching system outside of the system, because the problem is systemic, meaning you can't have it in the system. You need to have this external group who are the experts. You got to trust the experts because they know better than you. They're not affected by institutionalized problems, whatever that may be. And you need to delegate it to them to do it. And they're going to be given the power to destroy the group you've been told is the enemy. They always do the same thing. It's the exact same thing country by country. All right, everyone. It's getting late. Again, I don't know. Let me know in the chat. What do y'all think of this? Ladies, do you miss masculine men? And I know it came with like its good sides and bad sides. I think a lot of women get annoyed when men hit on them, let's be honest, depending on the men. But now that men don't do that anymore because they're afraid of going to prison, do you miss it? Do you miss it? I don't know. Maybe this is a bad conversation. Let's talk about something else. What do you think of government-run grocery stores? Do you want them running it? Do you want to go to your trademark DMV ShopRite or something like that? I don't know. Let me know what you think, folks. All right, look, we have fun conversations here, So, anyways, quick reminder. We won't have a show tomorrow or Monday. Again, Crossroads Monday through Thursday now, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Fridays, I'm now using them to work on features and investigations. I'm planning to, well, I'm already working on, we already recorded the first episode, and I'm working on the next ones. And so that's also the reason I won't be here Monday, unfortunately. One of the interviews that I was able to get for an upcoming feature I'm working on, I can only get the interview at the time of the show, and I have to travel for it. So it won't be possible, unfortunately. I hate canceling shows, but I have to do it on Monday. So we'll be back again on Tuesday. So I'll see y'all again Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That said, have a great weekend. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.